On August 12, 2015, at around 11:30 p.m., workers at the bustling port of Tianjin in China felt an unusual tremor rippling through the air. Some glanced around, worried, but shrugged it off until the next shockwave arrived and the port erupted into chaos. Less than 90 minutes later, the port, one of China's busiest, would become the site of one of the most devastating industrial explosions in modern history. This is the story of the Tianjin Explosion. The warehouse, located in the Binhai area of Tianjin, was packed with thousands of tons of hazardous chemicals. But here's where the things were already off. Sodium cyanide, ammonium nitrate, and potassium nitrate, substances highly volatile and flammable, were stored far too close to each other. Safety regulations were overlooked. The first explosion occurred at around 11:34 p.m., but it was nothing compared to what came next. Just 30 seconds later, a second, much larger blast ripped through the port. The explosion was so intense that it sent a fireball over 300 feet into the night sky that could be seen even from space. Firefighters at the scene didn't stand a chance. In the chaos, they had tried desperately to extinguish the fire, but had been tragically unaware of the contents in the warehouse. As the flames reached the piles of ammonium nitrate, the compound ignited, creating a chain reaction that modified the devastation. Nearby buildings shattered, their windows blown out by the force. Cars parked hundreds of meters away were flipped over like toys. It was a blast with the power equivalent to nearly 21 tons of TNT. As the dust settled, the true impact became clear. Over 170 people lost their lives that night, and more than 700 were injured. Many were first responders, firefighters who had gone in with the intention of containing a simple warehouse fire, unaware of the deadly cocktail stored inside. The blast left a crater 100 feet wide at the heart of the port, surrounded by wreckage, twisted metal, and blackened earth. Thousands of cars that had been awaiting shipment were burned to husks, and nearby buildings were demolished as if by a massive bomb. This catastrophe raised countless questions. How could a company be allowed to store such little chemicals so close to a major city? Why were there no clear safety protocols or proper containment measures? In the investigation that followed, it became clear that corruption and negligence were at the core. Company executives and local officials were found to have bypassed safety checks, accepting bribes to turn a blind eye. Tianjin Weihai Logistics, the company responsible for the warehouse, had repeatedly failed to comply with safety regulations, and authorities had let it happen. The damage went beyond physical destruction. Fear rippled through Tianjin as residents worried about toxic contamination in the water, air, and soil. Sodium cyanide is highly toxic, and nearly 700 tons of it were stored in the warehouse, threatening nearby communities. Some residents wore masks and left their homes, unsure of the air quality, while environmental workers scrambled to contain the hazardous spill. The Tianjin explosion wasn't just a tragic accident, it was a wake-up call exposing the deadly consequences of negligence and corruption. In the months following the disaster, Beijing launched a crackdown on industrial safety standards nationwide, vowing that this would never happen again. Hundreds of storage facilities were inspected and dozens of officials were arrested. Some regulations were tightened, but for the victims, the damage was already done. In the end, the Tianjin explosion is a haunting reminder of the thin line between industry and disaster. The people of Tianjin paid the price for mistakes they had no part in. Mistakes born of greed and reckless disregard for human life. Today, nearly a decade later, the scars remain. The crater has been filled and the port rebuilt, but the lessons of that fateful night endure.